"Don't embarrass me," Derek said through his teeth. "Sophia's father is a federal appellate judge." I didn't answer. The chandelier light trembled against the wine in my glass as he stood to introduce me. He kept his smile polished, effortless. "My sister works in legal contract stuff. Nothing major." A soft laugh followed. I felt it land on me like dust. I kept my hands folded in my lap. My pulse was steady. Too steady. Then Judge Langston approached our table. His steps were unhurried. Familiar. He extended his hand toward me first. "Your Honor," he said, warm but precise. "It's good to see you again." The words settled into the center of the room. I heard a fork slip. Porcelain struck crystal. No one moved. Derek's smile remained, but it no longer belonged to his face. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love connecting with you all. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Derek was never just my older brother. He was the investment, the heir, the proof that my parents had done something right. From the time we were teenagers, it was understood without being spoken, everything flowed toward him. Attention, money, expectation. My father used to introduce him at neighborhood gatherings as the future of this family, a phrase that carried weight even when Derek was still in braces. He went to Northwestern Law. My parents paid every cent. Tuition, housing, networking trips to D.C. I remember watching my mother sign the tuition checks at the kitchen table, her pen moving slowly, deliberately, like she was engraving something permanent into our future. When my acceptance letter arrived from a public law school in Iowa, my father nodded once. "That's practical," he said. Practical meant affordable. Practical meant mine to finance. I graduated with $210,000 in student loans. The number sat on my chest like a quiet animal that never slept. While Derek posed in tailored suits in downtown Chicago, I worked evenings in the law library scanning citations until my eyes burned. He once told a group of relatives at Thanksgiving that I lacked ambition. He said it casually, carving turkey, not looking at me. "Avery's smart," he added. "She just doesn't think big." No one asked what big meant. My parents bought him a high-rise condo in River North after his second year at the firm. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the river. They called it an early inheritance. I visited once. The marble countertops were cold under my palm. Everything smelled new, untouched. At the time, I was renting a narrow studio with pipes that knocked in the winter. I kept my case files stacked beside my bed because there wasn't room for a proper desk. When my mother visited, she stood near the door the entire time as if the space might stain her. Derek learned early how to use our last name. He would lean back in client meetings and mention my father's logistics company, the regional contracts, the political donations. He never lied outright. He just allowed assumptions to bloom. That was his talent, letting people fill in the blanks with something larger than the truth. The first time he called me for help, it was past midnight. His voice was lower than usual, controlled but frayed at the edges. A corporate client had filed a dispute over a non-compete clause. There were potential exposure issues. He needed clarity on federal enforcement trends, specifically how certain district courts were leaning. He didn't say please. I stayed up until 3 reviewing the case documents he emailed. I drafted a memo. Detailed, structured, quietly strategic. I sent it before dawn. A week later, he secured a favorable settlement. At Sunday dinner, my father raised a glass. "Derek handled it beautifully," he said. "Sharp instincts. That's what leadership looks like." I waited. Derek smiled modestly. He did not look at me. He did not mention the memo. He did not mention the late-night call. After dinner, while I stood at the sink rinsing plates, he stepped beside me. "Thanks," he said softly. "It just would have complicated things if they knew." Complicated what I wanted to ask. Instead, I dried my hands on a towel and nodded. That was the shape of our dynamic. I built quietly. He displayed loudly. My work became invisible the moment it touched his name. By the time Judge Langston called me Your Honor in that dining room, this wasn't the first time Derek had underestimated the architecture beneath my silence. It was just the first time the room heard it too. It wasn't that I lacked ambition. It was that I learned early how to move without announcing myself. After law school, I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago. White walls, fluorescent light. The kind of hallway where footsteps echo longer than they should. My first major case involved an $80 million securities fraud scheme that had hollowed out retirement accounts across 3 states. I remember the binders stacked on my desk, thick gray heavy with paper and other people's ruin. For 2 years, my life narrowed to evidence charts and late-night depositions. I learned the texture of lies, the way executives avoided eye contact when the numbers tightened around them. I stood in court and spoke evenly while defense attorneys twice my age tried to rattle me. I never raised my voice. I didn't need to. We secured convictions, restitution orders, prison time. My parents thought I worked for the government. Derek said it like a footnote. When the nomination call came, I was 30. I was in my office reviewing sentencing memos. The Deputy Attorney General's voice was measured. Careful. My name had been recommended for a federal district court vacancy, youngest on the short list. I sat very still after the call ended. The investigation lasted 16 months. FBI background checks, financial disclosures, interviews with colleagues from law school I hadn't spoken to in years. They examined everything: campaign donations, academic records, old emails. My life was opened and cataloged. Derek never knew. I told my parents I was considering a lateral move. They asked if it would pay more. That was the only metric that seemed to land. When the Senate confirmed my appointment, I watched the vote alone on a muted television in chambers. The clerk swore me in the following week. The robe felt heavier than I expected. Not dramatic. Just substantial. Like something designed to anchor you. I didn't post about it. I didn't host a dinner. I changed my voicemail greeting and went back to work. By then I had purchased a townhouse in Lakeview. Brick exterior, 3 floors, quiet street lined with old maples. The price was $2.4 million, a number my father would have considered proof of success. When my mother asked where I lived, I told her I rented a small place near the courthouse. It was easier. Less distortion in her voice, less recalibration. Sometimes I would drive to Sunday dinners from that townhouse, park my car 3 blocks away, and arrive in an older sedan I kept specifically for that purpose. I don't know when concealment became habit. I only know it felt cleaner than explanation. Nathan Cole entered my life during a corruption trial 3 years into my tenure on the bench. He was an FBI agent assigned to testify about financial tracking patterns, quiet, precise, the kind of man who measured words before releasing them. During a sidebar one afternoon, our eyes met briefly. Recognition passed between us. Not personal, professional. He understood the weight of what we were building in that courtroom. After the verdict, he approached me in chambers. "Congratulations, Your Honor," he said. There was something deliberate in the way he used the title, as if he knew it was rarely spoken in certain rooms. Later, at a legal conference, he saw Derek across the lobby. Derek was speaking loudly to a group of associates about market leverage and firm expansion. Nathan glanced at me. "Does he know?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. Nathan never mentioned it again. He kept my silence the way one keeps classified information, not out of loyalty, but out of respect for the boundary. By the time Judge Langston spoke those 2 words at the dinner table, I had been wearing the robe for nearly 4 years. 4 years of rulings, sentencings, decisions that altered the trajectory of lives. Derek thought I was small because I never argued for space. He didn't understand that I had already been holding far heavier things. By the time I had settled into the rhythm of the bench, Derek had found a new orbit. Her name was Sophia Langston. He mentioned her first in passing as if she were incidental. Event planner, he said one Sunday, scrolling through his phone. Connected family. That was the word he chose. Connected. 2 weeks later, her last name surfaced. Langston. I remember the pause in my breath when he said it. Not visible, not audible. Just a small internal shift. Harold Langston had sat across from me at judicial conferences, had debated statutory interpretation with a kind of dry precision I respected. He was disciplined, measured, not easily impressed. Derek didn't know that. What he knew was that Sophia's father sat on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. The change in him was gradual at first, then deliberate. He replaced his car, upgraded his watch, started using phrases at dinner like institutional credibility and judicial temperament, words that felt rehearsed in his mouth. He began attending fundraisers he would once have dismissed as ceremonial. He studied biographies of federal judges the way some men study stock charts. He called me one evening, his tone unusually firm. "I need you to keep things simple," he said. "Simple about your job. Don't get into details. Just say you do contract advisory work or compliance. Government stuff sounds small and technical." I let the silence stretch. "This matters," he added. "Sophia's family moves in different circles, different from what I almost asked." Instead, I said, "I understand." A week before the dinner, where everything shifted, he called again. This time, it was about my clothes. "Wear something understated," he said. "No severe cuts. Nothing that looks like you're trying too hard. And Avery." He hesitated. "Please don't correct anyone on legal topics. It can come off defensive." Defensive. I stood in my closet after we hung up, looking at the row of tailored suits I wore to preside over trials involving federal indictments. I chose a simple navy dress, no jewelry beyond a watch. At Sunday dinner, my mother beamed as Derek described Sophia's family home in Lake Forest. "Old money," he said almost reverently. "You can feel it in the architecture." My father nodded. "That's legacy." Derek began telling stories about private conversations with judges, casual mentions of Harold and a few others on the circuit. He implied mentorship, access, insight. I listened carefully. He had never attended a federal judicial conference. He had never clerked. His practice was corporate litigation, profitable, respectable, but far removed from the appellate bench. The circles he described did not overlap with mine. One evening, I overheard him on the phone in my parents' kitchen. "Yes, I've spent time around several federal judges," he was saying. "You learn how they think. It's a small world." His reflection caught mine in the darkened window. For a moment, his voice faltered. Then it smoothed again. He was building something fragile, a narrative shaped around proximity. When he later told me this engagement could elevate everything, I understood what he meant. Not love, not partnership, elevation. He needed the illusion intact. He needed me, smaller, quieter, simpler, so his ascent would look uninterrupted. I had spent years making decisions that altered corporate empires and prison sentences without ever raising my voice. Derek believed influence was volume. He didn't realize how little noise real authority makes. He didn't shout when he gave instructions. Derek never needed to. Control for him was always delivered in a measured tone, like professional advice. A few days before the engagement dinner, he called again. "Just tell them you're a freelance legal consultant," he said. "It sounds flexible, neutral. No one asks follow-ups." I was standing in my kitchen looking at a stack of sentencing drafts waiting on my desk upstairs. "Freelance," I repeated. "Yes. It's cleaner. Cleaner than federal judge." He exhaled softly as if trying to be patient. "You have to understand, Avery. The Langstons are established. Generational. It's a different tier. They think differently. And I don't. It's not about intelligence, he said quickly. It's about exposure, culture, exposure. I let the words settle between us. I had presided over corruption trials involving CEOs who thought the law bent around their status. I had read financial disclosures that mapped out empires. I had sat across from senators during confirmation hearings. But I said nothing. He continued. Also park a few blocks away. The valet area is tight. And optics matter. Optics. The night of the dinner, I drove my older sedan instead of my usual car. I parked 3 streets over under a dim streetlight and walked the remaining distance in low heels. The air was sharp with early autumn cold. My breath came out in thin, visible lines. The restaurant's facade glowed warm and expensive. Inside, everything felt curated, the lighting, the glassware, even the spacing between tables. Derek stood near the entrance, hand resting lightly at the small of Sophia's back, guiding her like something newly acquired. He glanced down at my shoes first, then my coat. Good, he said quietly. Subtle. I nodded. Earlier that afternoon, my phone had vibrated with a message from my mother. Don't debate legal politics tonight. Let Derek lead. He's the one with the future in this room. I read it twice. The future. I imagined the courtroom I would enter on Monday morning. The seal behind the bench. The weight of the docket. I thought about the dozens of cases scheduled for argument, real consequences, real lives balanced on procedural interpretation. But in my mother's message, the future belonged exclusively to my brother. I typed back a simple, of course. At the table, Derek steered conversations with careful precision. He spoke about corporate growth, about strategic litigation, about how the firm was positioning itself for federal-level exposure. He used phrases he had practiced. Whenever discussion drifted toward constitutional interpretation or sentencing reform, he gently redirected. Avery works more on contract compliance, he inserted once, smiling. Very niche. I felt the eyes at the table adjust accordingly. Polite interest downgraded. Sophia asked me lightly, "Do you enjoy freelance work?" "It must be unpredictable." "It requires discipline," I said. Derek's foot brushed mine under the table, a warning subtle but unmistakable. I lowered my gaze to my water glass. Across from me, Judge Langston watched the exchange with an expression that did not change. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't amusement. It was assessment. Control isn't loud, it's cumulative. It builds in small concessions: a parked car, a softened title, a swallowed correction. That night, I agreed to all of it. Not because I believed in Derek's version of hierarchy, but because I wanted to see how far the illusion would stretch before it tore on its own. I had agreed to the illusion, but a few days before that dinner, something shifted. The University of Chicago hosted a judicial symposium that week, a closed forum on sentencing reform and federal discretion. The kind of room where conversations stay measured, where language is chosen carefully, and nothing is said casually. Judge Harold Langston was the keynote speaker. The auditorium was spare and understated. Dark wood panels, clean acoustics. I arrived early, as I always did, and took a seat along the aisle. When he entered, there was no announcement, just a quiet ripple of acknowledgement among those who understood the weight of his presence. He began speaking about restraint, about the discipline required to separate ego from interpretation. His voice carried evenly across the room, steady, deliberate. I listened the way I always did in those settings, not as an observer, but as a peer absorbing nuance. Afterward, there was a small reception in an adjoining hall. Coffee, low conversation, professional smiles. He saw me before I approached. "Your Honor," he said, extending his hand. No hesitation, no uncertainty. His grip was firm, familiar. We spoke briefly about a recent appellate ruling that had drawn attention in both our districts. The exchange was technical, precise, the language of colleagues who understand each other's work. Then he tilted his head slightly. "I understand my daughter is seeing someone from Chicago," he said. "Derek Bennett." The name sounded different in that room. "Yes," I said. He studied my face for a moment longer than courtesy required. "You're related. He's my older brother." Something flickered in his expression. Not judgment, not amusement. Something closer to recalibration. "I see," he said quietly. We stepped aside from the main cluster of attendees. The air carried the faint scent of roasted coffee and polished wood. "He speaks confidently," Judge Langston continued. "He mentioned you work in contract advisory." There it was. Clean, neutral, controlled. "I don't discuss my role with my family," I said. His eyes sharpened just slightly. "By choice?" "Yes." A pause. "I find," he said carefully, "that people often mistake discretion for limitation." I didn't respond immediately. Around us, the murmur of conversation rose and fell like distant surf. "My brother values visibility," I said at last. "I prefer substance." He considered that. "And your parents?" he asked. "They invested in him," I said. It seemed efficient not to complicate that narrative. The corner of his mouth tightened. Not a smile. Not quite disapproval. "No one," he said finally, his voice lower, "now should have to make themselves smaller so someone else can feel larger." The words were not dramatic. They were delivered the way a judge delivers a ruling, measured, definitive. For a moment I felt something unfamiliar. Not anger. Not vindication. Recognition. As we spoke, I became aware of someone standing a few feet away near the refreshment table. A woman with sharp posture, attentive eyes. She was not pretending not to listen. Caroline Langston, Sophia's younger sister. I recognized her from a Chicago Tribune byline I had seen attached to investigative pieces on municipal corruption. She had a reporter's stillness, the kind that absorbs more than it reveals. Our eyes met briefly. She did not look surprised. Later, as I walked out into the cold afternoon air, I understood something with quiet clarity. The illusion Derek had built was not just fragile, it had already begun to crack in rooms he did not even know existed. The illusion had already begun to crack. But Derek didn't know that when he walked into the Gilded Room. The restaurant lived up to its name. Gold leaf trim along the ceiling, velvet-backed chairs, low lighting that softened everything, skin-age tension. The kind of place designed for announcements that change trajectories. I arrived alone, as instructed. Derek stood near the center of the room, hand lightly resting at Sophia's waist, as if anchoring himself to her family's gravity. When he saw me, he gave a quick nod. Approval. Assessment complete. We were seated at a long table near the private windows. Crystal stemware. Custom menus embossed with both family names. My parents sat closer to Sophia and Judge Langston than they had ever sat beside me at anything important. Conversation moved in measured currents, business, property, mutual acquaintances in legal circles. Derek spoke often. He leaned forward when Judge Langston addressed him, nodding with practiced attentiveness. When it came time for introductions beyond the immediate family, Derek gestured toward me with an open palm. "This is my sister Avery," he said smoothly. "She does some legal support work. Contracts. Compliance. Keeps things organized. Legal support." The phrase landed gently, deliberately reduced. I inclined my head. My mother followed quickly. "Derek has always been the ambitious one," she added, smiling toward Sophia's parents. "From the time he was little, we knew he was meant for something significant." My father nodded. "He's built for leadership." Across the table, Sophia's eyes shone as she spoke about joining a family devoted to justice. She described holiday dinners where constitutional debates would replace small talk. She laughed lightly. "It's surreal," she said. "To think I'll be surrounded by that kind of influence." Influence. I watched Judge Langston as she spoke. His expression did not shift. Derek reached for his wine glass. We're very aligned on values, he said. I've always felt comfortable around the federal bench. The words were confident. Too confident. There was a pause in the conversation, the kind that happens when plates are cleared and fresh glasses are poured. In that small pocket of quiet, Judge Langston turned slightly in his chair. His gaze moved past Derek. It settled on me. He stood. Not abruptly, not ceremonially. Simply stood and extended his hand across the table. Your Honor? He said clearly, his voice carrying just enough to still the nearby conversations. It's good to see you again. The room contracted. The phrase did not echo. It settled. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. Derek blinked. Then he laughed short, light, reflexive. That's a good one, he said. She hates when people tease her like that. His hand brushed my sleeve under the table as if to signal that I should play along. I did not withdraw my hand from Judge Langston's. I appreciate the invitation tonight, I said evenly. Sophia's smile faltered first. Then my mother's. Caroline, seated farther down the table, leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady. Judge Langston did not sit back down immediately. He looked at Derek, then back at me. I don't make a habit of misusing titles, he said. The sentence was quiet. It did not need force. Derek's laugh did not return. In that moment, something shifted in the air, not dramatic, not explosive, just irreversible. Irreversible is rarely loud. It usually arrives disguised as a question. Caroline set her glass down with deliberate care. Your Honor, she said, and this time there was no hesitation in the title. I've been covering federal financial crime for a few years. I'm curious, how are you seeing district courts handle layered money laundering cases tied to shell nonprofits? It wasn't a social question. It was precise, technical. A journalist's blade wrapped in velvet. Derek shifted beside me. Caroline, tonight's not really. It's fine, I said. I folded my hands lightly on the tablecloth. The linen felt cool beneath my fingertips. There's been a tightening in evidentiary thresholds, I said. Especially when digital asset tracing intersects with nonprofit structures. The courts are less tolerant of fragmented paper trails now. We're seeing broader admissibility for forensic accounting summaries under Rule 1006. I watched recognition pass across her face. And intent? She asked quietly. In cases where executive boards claim ignorance, willful blindness doesn't shield liability, I said. Not when internal memos demonstrate structured avoidance. The words were measured, not defensive, not performative. Sophia's eyes moved between us. How would you know that level of detail? She asked lightly, but there was strain under the softness. Caroline didn't look at her sister. She was already reaching for her phone. The glow from the screen lit her features from below. Her thumb moved quickly, practiced, efficient. She typed my name without asking for spelling. Derek leaned forward. Caroline, there are a lot of people named Avery Bennett. She didn't answer. The room had grown quieter than before. Not frozen, just attentive. Even the waitstaff seemed to move more slowly. Caroline's expression changed first. Not shock, not excitement, confirmation. She turned the screen slightly toward her father. United States Senate confirmation record. Nomination approved. United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. That case set precedent, Nathan continued. It shifted enforcement strategy statewide. No one interrupted him. Crystal glasses stood untouched. The candle flames along the table trembled slightly in the ventilation draft. My mother's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Sophia looked at Derek as if recalculating something fundamental. Caroline lowered her phone slowly. You weren't freelancing, she said. No, I answered. The silence that followed was not confused. It was structural. It rearranged the hierarchy in the room without raising its voice. Derek's complexion had drained to a pale gray. The confidence that once filled his posture had nowhere to stand now. He opened his mouth as if to correct the narrative. But for the first time in his life, There was no version left to manage. There are moments when a room stops belonging to the person who thought they owned it. Derek was the first to break the silence. This was deliberate. He said, his voice low but sharp. "You let this happen." He didn't look at Judge Langston. He didn't look at Nathan. He looked at me. "You made me look like a fool." I held his gaze. "I didn't say anything," I replied. "That's the point," he snapped. "You could have warned me." Warned him. About my own life. The table remained still. No one rushed to soften the exchange. Even my parents seemed uncertain where to align themselves. "You embarrassed me in front of them," he continued, gesturing vaguely towards Sophia's family. "You knew what tonight meant." I let the words settle before answering. "You never asked who I was," I said. The sentence was not raised. It didn't need to be. His jaw tightened. "I didn't need to. You've always been." He stopped himself. Small, perhaps. Secondary. Supportive. Judge Langston folded his hands on the tablecloth. His voice when he spoke was measured and unhurried. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "I have worked with federal judges, prosecutors, and litigators across this circuit for decades." Derek went still. "Your sister is among the most disciplined and intellectually rigorous jurists I've encountered." The word jurists hung in the air. "I respect corporate attorneys," Judge Langston continued evenly, "but I do not confuse revenue with impact. It was not cruel. It was precise." Sophia's posture shifted beside Derek. The brightness in her expression dimmed not dramatically, but perceptibly. She looked at him as if a new layer of information had just been added to a file she thought she understood. "You told me you moved in those circles?" she said quietly. Derek turned toward her. "I do. I mean professionally." "Adjacent. Adjacent." Nathan adjusted his stance slightly near the edge of the table. He did not appear eager to speak, but he did not look away either. "There's something else," he said carefully. Every head turned. "The Bureau is reviewing a series of transactions involving Caldwell Logistics and one of its external counsel firms." Derek's breathing shifted shallow faster. "That's confidential," he said quickly. "You can't. I'm not disclosing details," Nathan replied. "Only that regulatory scrutiny has expanded." My father's face drained of color. Caldwell Logistics was one of Derek's larger clients, a stepping stone he had once called it. "This is irrelevant," Derek said louder now. "This is an attack." "It's procedure," Nathan corrected. The word procedure carries weight in federal circles. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't dramatize. It simply moves forward. Derek's composure fractured visibly then. His hands, once so controlled around a wine glass, trembled slightly. He stood halfway from his chair, then sat back down as if unsure where authority resided in the room. "You've been undermining me for years," he said to me, his voice thinner now. I felt no surge of triumph, no vindication, only clarity. "I built my life quietly," I said. "You built yours loudly. Those are different choices." Sophia did not reach for his hand. Caroline watched with the same stillness she'd carried at the symposium, documenting without writing. Derek looked smaller then, not because of my title, not because of Nathan's comment, but because for the first time the narrative he had controlled no longer responded to him. Collapse isn't always explosive. Sometimes it is simply the sound of a structure realizing it was never load-bearing to begin with. Collapse leaves a residue. It lingers in the air long after the chairs are pushed back and the checks are signed. Sophia did not make a scene that night. She didn't argue. She didn't defend him. She simply stood when the dinner dissolved and said very evenly, "I need time." The engagement was postponed the following week. That was the word released to friends and extended family. Postponed suggests logistics. It doesn't admit fracture. Caroline's article came out 3 Sundays later. The headline focused on a new generation of federal judges reshaping white-collar enforcement in the Midwest. It spoke about rigor, discretion, independence from political noise. My name appeared once, contextual, restrained. There was no mention of Derek, no subtext about family, just the work. It was the cleanest form of acknowledgement I'd ever received. At my parents' house, the tone shifted. My mother called first, her voice softer than usual. "We didn't realize," she said. Not accusatory, not apologetic, just unsettled. My father asked practical questions. How long had I been on the bench? What did the salary structure look like? Was there security? The curiosity wasn't about me, it was about recalculating status. They invited me to dinner again. This time, my mother introduced me to a neighbor as our daughter, the federal judge. The title felt heavier in that room than it ever had in court. I set my fork down gently. "I'm still Avery," I said. "You don't need to upgrade me." They laughed uncertainly, but I could feel the shift, the subtle attempt to reposition me as the new emblem, the new proof, the replacement heir. I declined that role quietly. "I'm not a correction," I told them later. "I'm not the counterweight to Derek. I don't need to be." 6 months passed. The Langstons hosted a legal aid fundraiser in early spring. A modest event, understated, purposeful. I arrived through the front entrance this time. Valet. No detour. No second car. Judge Langston greeted me as he would any colleague. Sophia nodded politely. There was distance, but not hostility. Caroline shook my hand and thanked me for a recent ruling that had strengthened whistleblower protections. No one adjusted their tone for me. No one reduced it either. Across the room, I saw Nathan in conversation with a compliance officer from a logistics firm. He gave me a brief nod. Professional. Balanced. Derek did not attend. By then, Caldwell Logistics had terminated its external counsel contract amid internal audit findings. The regulatory review Nathan mentioned had widened. Not criminal, not yet, but destabilizing enough. Derek's firm reassigned him to smaller accounts. His assent paused. We did not discuss it. When I think back to that dinner at the Gilded Room, I don't remember the humiliation he felt, or the silence that followed. I remember the weightlifting. For years, I believed silence was strength, and in many ways, it was. It allowed me to build without distraction, to work without spectacle. But there is a difference between being quiet and being concealed. Impression management is exhausting. Shrinking yourself to protect someone else's narrative costs more than confrontation ever could. That night, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't expose him. I simply stopped participating in the distortion. And sometimes that is the loudest act of all.